The things that I would make a quick note about, though, on the one hand, for example, it does seem a little bit odd sometimes about what they choose to include. In some years where there's not very much to include, they bring in a lot of little odd, nitpicky type stuff. And of course, on a year that's really, really packed, they're not going to be able to include nearly as much. For example, in 1998, there's a lot of gearing up for The Phantom Menace. So even though they mention tons of video games elsewhere in the book, they don't mention Star Wars Rogue Squadron, at least not that I noticed, which is a video game that not only started a long-running video game series that they mention elsewhere in the book when other versions from that series come out, or other games in that series come out, but it was a big deal because it was the first Nintendo 64 game, or one of the first, to require the use of that expansion pack that added to the memory of the system just to be able to run the game and see the visuals the way they were meant to be seen. Given how much of a focus they put on technology, video game, special effects, editing, and so forth, it seems odd that something like that would not be included. But again, it's because of how packed certain years are. So you're going to find that certain years feel like there's just so much going on, there's no way they could ever have included everything, and other years where there's not nearly as much going on and you're sitting there thinking, wow, that was really kind of an obscure fact that was tossed in there. It's just the nature of a book like this, but it is something you might find noticeable as you're reading it. Another thing I would consider as a potential quibble is, and I am probably hypersensitive to this. I teach history, I've taught American government, constitutional law, I follow current events very closely, and I try very hard in my teaching to keep any political ideas out of there, or give the kids, getting tongue-tied, or give the kids multiple perspectives on any given item, any given event, so that it's not me telling them what to believe so much as it's me giving them all the different sides and saying, okay, you make up your mind. We're supposed to be building a generation of critical thinkers here, right? Or at least to be ready for future challenges. Well, one of the things that, thanks to that background, I've come to be very cognizant of is political leanings in what I read. And we all know, or at least many Star Wars fans know, that George Lucas has a definite political leaning towards, I don't think liberal is the right word for it. He's more Democrat than Republican, we'll put it that way. And he said so himself plenty of times, and some of his comments with regard to, say, the war on terrorism in relation to the Star Wars films every once in a while are things that sort of draw out that political leaning, so to speak. Well, you also wind up finding that every once in a while popping up here in such a way that it's not very pronounced, but at the same time it's something that if you are hypersensitive to it, as I am, and I don't mean sensitive as in, oh, I can't believe you, I just mean I notice that kind of stuff. It's just something that I've sort of trained myself to pay attention to, especially when looking at news media and stuff like that. You will notice every once in a while that there's a definite leaning, at least on recent political events, probably the last 15 to 20 years, that is evident. For example, the wording of an entry about the 2000 election with George W. Bush versus Al Gore seems to lean in a political direction rather than being more unbiased. If you look at page, I believe it's 175, there's not a lot of entries about political figures prior to becoming president. Every once in a while there is. But for the most part, we see only when people become president, and then every once in a while we'll see something else pop up about them as their president. In this case, on page 175, we have a oddball item, March 19th of 1996, not that there wasn't anything else going on with Star Wars that year, Barack Obama, running unopposed on the ballot, wins the Democratic nomination for state senator from Illinois' 13th district. Now, it sets up the president, who will get a couple more entries later that are actually indexed that deal with stuff like the first African-American president, which is a gigantic historic deal, and some of the playing around with lightsabers that we see pictures of in here of Barack Obama with his family. But it seems a little bit odd that of all the presidents, there's that one entry here in this particular year, which was sort of bursting with Star Wars stuff, just like pretty much any year, 1991 or after. Also, if you look at page 241, I believe was the example that I jotted down here, and I can understand definitely the political leanings thing. I mean, George Lucas, I believe, attended Barack Obama's nomination, so it's definite political leaning to a degree. but if you look at the bottom of 241, of all the oddball facts that get run on the bottom of a given page, like 99% of the human genome mapped to 99.99% accuracy, we have George W. Bush prematurely declares mission accomplished in Iraq. Now, even if that wasn't entirely taken out of context during the event in the media coverage afterwards, and even though that has pretty much been cleared up and explained a million times from both sides since since 2003, when that comment was made or when that banner was flown for the mission for that particular vessel, why choose that, of all things, to say about the war in Iraq or about the war on terrorism or about the year 2003 that is so bursting with events? Why make that what goes in there on that little runner down at the bottom? Again, it's not a big deal, but if you are hypersensitive to that sort of thing, know going into it that you may every once in a while run across one of those little hiccups that make you go, why'd you have to include that, or why that particular wording of it? I would certainly prefer my Star Wars reading to be apolitical or at least politically neutral. Every once in a while you see a little thing like that come along, but really, I don't think it's something that's big. I just think it's something that was interesting and deserving of note. If we look at Star Wars fiction, it's very rare that we see stuff that jumps out and we say that is an obvious political thing dealing with the real world, because there's allegory, there's symbolism, there's ties into real world events, but of course it's all a fictional world. Only when we see something that is written in a nonfiction context would we see something like that. So it just so happens that with this being such an immense, comprehensive, downright amazing tome of Star Wars real-world information and the context around it in real-world events, of course, you're going to wind up having things slip through or slip out that just kind of strikes you as, really? Oh, okay. So, in any event, this book it's awesome. Okay, if you like Star Wars, you're going to love this. If you like real-world history and Star Wars franchise stuff, you are going to love this. I will tell you that I blazed through about 200 to 250 pages of this in less than a week, and that was just, I would pick it up, read a little bit, pick it up later, read a little bit. I just sort of kept finding myself gravitating toward the book to pick up and read, because you really can just read through 1 year's stuff in just a few minutes and put it down, but you're going to feel like you're drawn back to it to read yet another year's information. I really find it to be one of the best Star Wars books produced in quite a while, though I know I've said that previously. It's certainly from an out-of-universe standpoint, from a real-world standpoint, is probably one of the best, if not the best, real-world Star Wars franchise books produced perhaps ever. And that is a very high compliment given things like the cinema of George Lucas and so forth that are available out there. So I would definitely pick it up. Again, it is Star Wars Year by Year, a visual chronicle. This is the way that you will see it in stores because, of course, the slipcase is what is on the outside. Now, the regular price of this is $50. Is it worth $50? Actually, I would say yes. I was able to get my copy for $25 because that's how low they at one point dipped on Amazon, and that was after I'd put in a pre-order, and they've got that pre-order price guarantee. I believe at the moment it's gone up a little bit on Amazon. It's more like $30, but for $25, $30, honestly, even up to $50, I would recommend Star Wars Year by Year. The better deal you get on it, the more cost-effective you are at getting a really awesome piece of Star Wars publishing. Kudos to Ryder, Dan, and Pablo for an absolutely amazing piece of work here. One of the best. And with that, we'll wrap up this visual showcase. I'll catch you again in the future as we take a look at, among other things, the Star Wars Vault. Good night, everybody.